The wealthy CEO said at once, her voice sharp, cold as polished steel. "Stay out of my life." The mechanic didn't argue. He grabbed his toolbox, crossed the massive boardroom, and walked away in silence while 8 stunned executives watched him go. His 6-year-old daughter waited in the parking garage below, gripping her faded stuffed rabbit the way a fragile child clings to the one thing she cannot bear losing. He had no patience for a proud woman who looked right through him like he was invisible. But exactly 3 weeks later, Giselle herself was standing outside his modest apartment door at 11 o'clock at night, tears streaming down her face, hands trembling with regret. You have to wonder what breaks a powerful CEO enough to come crying to the humble mechanic she pushed away. The morning began exactly like all of Liam Ashford's mornings did, quietly. Deliberate, moving with a quiet grace that high society people never noticed. He was 29 years old, carrying a heavy guarded stillness that only ever comes, not from an empty life, but from learning how to shoulder crushing weight all by himself. By 7 a.m. he was kneeling in the cramped hallway of their third-floor Brooklyn walk-up, tying his daughter's shoes while she stood gripping Scout, that beloved stuffed rabbit with the torn left ear and the crooked plastic eye glued on twice, pressed flat against her little chest like a tiny emotional shield. Arya was 6 years old with her mother's eyes wide, deeply honest, and entirely unprotected. The kind of soft eyes that notice things proud people ignore. She stared down at her dad, asking the exact same question she asked every dawn. The very same one she had asked 300 days straight without skipping a beat. Would he be waiting to pick her up that afternoon? He warmly promised her yes. He always promised her yes, and he had never broken that single vow. The tiny home was set up with the gentle care of a man who cherished the small details. A heavy wooden bookshelf stretched across one entire wall, and those books were stacked, not by title or writer, but in a brilliant system you and I could only grasp if we truly understood his beautiful, complex mind. Resting on his small desk corner sat a thick notebook packed edge to edge with complex symbols and equations he wrote himself, the blue ink faintly smeared from the edge of his left hand. Little Arya called it the hard book. She once asked about those numbers, and he gently explained they were a tough puzzle he wanted to solve. She trusted that totally, the way innocent kids accept truth with pure faith, never demanding any further proof. He dressed in the dark blue coveralls of Weston Capital's humble building maintenance crew, that corporate logo stitched in tiny yellow threads at his collar. He had been quietly fixing things there for 14 months. None of those wealthy executives knew about his powerful past, and he never offered them a single clue, because no one bothered to ask and his old life didn't matter anymore. 3 short years ago, Liam was an elite vice president at a massive firm in Lower Manhattan, the kind of corporate empire where power meant everything, and coffee came in expensive glass mugs. And the daily grind was brutal in a way that demanded his absolute, brilliant perfection. He had been amazing at it, truly exceptional, honestly, and he possessed that quiet confidence without ever needing anyone's hollow applause. What he never saw coming was the tragic, humbling way fate rips your world entirely apart. Grief simply ignores logic, stripping away anything that makes heartbreak actually bearable. His wife, Claire, was killed on a cold November Tuesday on the expressway. Her car was just making a completely normal, everyday left turn. Claire was driving home from her office. Sweet little Arya was safely home with their babysitter. Liam was in a crucial strategy meeting when his phone started ringing and never stopped. He handed in his corporate resignation days later, not because the demanding executive job was too hard, but because that cutthroat world meant absolutely nothing. All that mattered was his tiny 3-year-old daughter, who desperately needed her father after those terrible nightmares. Scout was the very last precious toy Claire bought for little Arya weeks before that fatal crash. Arya hadn't let go of that stuffed dog since the morning they buried her mother. Every morning, Liam dropped her at school, watching his fragile daughter walk through those bright yellow doors, with Scout safely tucked into the side pocket of her backpack. Her gentle teachers kindly allowed her to keep the toy close by during classes, because those teachers recognized raw grief when they saw a motherless child clutching a stuffed animal that desperately. Liam rode the quiet bus to Weston Capital. He took the service elevator down to the mechanical floor and started his humble maintenance shift, a quiet life the wealthy executives above completely ignored. He thrived in this blue-collar job too, just in a totally different way. Calm and methodical, he fixed complex building systems with a quiet brilliance no manual could teach. His grumpy supervisor once joked that his brain was way too sharp for simple maintenance work. Liam simply smiled, said thanks, and went right back to repairing the massive cooling unit, 22 floors above his head. Picture this. Giselle Weston stood fiercely by her penthouse glass wall, staring at a city unaware she was about to either cement her legacy or lose absolutely everything. She was only 28 years old and she'd fiercely led Weston Capital as its powerful CEO for 2 grueling years, since the tragic week her demanding father, Harold, suffered a massive stroke that ripped him away from daily choices but not severe enough to keep him from coldly watching her during tense board meetings, wearing a heavy expression she couldn't quite figure out. This entire corporate empire was his masterpiece. He didn't just blindly hand her the crown because he lacked other wealthy successors. 3 bitter senior executives fully expected to steal that coveted CEO chair, and they absolutely had not hidden their deep rage. He chose her purely because she was the perfect leader, and Harold Weston was a proud man whose ruthless business instincts rarely missed. But those corporate directors lacked his faith. We all know how vultures watch a falling tightrope walker, smiling politely, paying close attention, fully prepared to strike the second her perfect balance finally broke. The massive merger with the Harlan Group was supposed to silence all her vicious doubters once and for all. $340 million, Weston Capital's biggest historical transaction. Her glorious signing ceremony was locked in for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. 6 exhausting months of talks, 2 brutal rounds of due diligence, plus a flawless final audit package that Xavier Monroe recently handed over to the board just 2 days earlier, with his signature quiet, chilling efficiency. Xavier was the brilliant CFO, 43 years old, guarding the company's secrets since before Jelly even started high school. Her strict father trusted the man completely, without any hesitation. You know how you trust someone who's always been standing right beside you through every crisis, never making the disaster any worse. I inherited that blind trust the exact same way I inherited the desk, the corner office, and the 64-year history of this firm without questioning it, because there had never been a single reason to. Liam showed up every morning with answers to questions I hadn't even finished asking. His reliability was my anchor. I let it hold me steady without ever bothering to inspect the chain myself. Then came the morning that broke everything apart. Liam was called to the 22nd floor to check the server cooling unit inside our executive conference room. A standard cooling loop, running parallel to the main trading system, connected straight to the transaction logs on the floors down below. Just a completely routine check. The kind we scheduled every 6 weeks, usually taking less than an hour. But his daughter Aria's teacher called at 7:45. She had come down with a bug. The daycare was missing 2 staff members and little Aria needed to be picked up before noon if he couldn't find another option. Liam called 3 different people over the next 20 minutes. Nobody answered. He called the school back and told them the truth. By 8:15, he had no backup plan and a strict deadline before my 10 o'clock board meeting. So he brought Aria along. He told her twice on the drive over, using that gentle tone he reserved for when things actually mattered, that she had to sit in the hallway chair right outside the conference room, not move, not make a single sound, and definitely not go inside. Aria lasted 11 minutes. She honestly wasn't trying to cause any trouble. She had simply never seen a room with massive floor-to-ceiling windows and a gorgeous view of the entire city skyline. That sweeping view pulled her in, like gravity pulls innocent things that haven't yet learned how to fight back. She brought her toy. She sat down cross-legged on the carpet right beside her dad's toolbox, not making a single sound, trying so incredibly hard to remain completely invisible. The investors walked in at 9:58, 12 of them, pushing through the glass doors with that cold, ruthless focus that millions of dollars breeds in the people guarding it. I entered last. I froze when I saw the little girl on the floor. I looked at the child, then at the man in the blue uniform, crouching beside the servers, then back at the board members standing right behind me, staring at the exact same scene. Liam stood up. He clearly stated his name. He explained everything without making excuses. The sick teacher, the totally ruined backup plans, the strict work order, promising that little Aria hadn't touched a single thing and wouldn't. His voice stayed totally level. He didn't beg for my mercy or fake some deep remorse. He simply gave me the honest truth about what happened. I listened to barely 3 sentences before my corporate pride made the awful decision. "This is not a daycare," I snapped. My voice was perfectly controlled, brutally professional, and easily 15 degrees colder than the room. I need you both to leave. Liam just nodded. He started packing his tools away, closing the case with that same quiet, methodical care he always showed. Before closing the lid, he gave me a look you never want to see. Complete emotional distance. He spoke with the quiet, steady tone of a man simply offering a fix she desperately needed. The cooling loop on the backup server has a tiny pressure leak, the humble mechanic explained. It is minor, but pressure has been building for a week. If you ignore this warning before the workday ends, you might see massive failures in the transaction logs during peak afternoon trading. The proud CEO shot him her signature icy corporate glare, reserved only for people far beneath her busy high-stakes world. We have a tech department, she coldly snapped. This is not your problem. You and I know this type. An arrogant board member in a sharp suit, acting entitled after 11 years, let out a mocking sound that poorly disguised a laugh. It was clearly pure mockery. His little girl, Arya, peered up at him, whispering softly enough to hide her broken heart, asking if these rich people hated her daddy. He stayed completely silent. The humble mechanic gently stroked his daughter's hair, quietly steering her toward the heavy corporate exit. Giselle threw her final prideful dagger right at the door. Stay out of my life. Cold, absolute, and drenched in the arrogance of a powerful CEO who always held the winning hand. Liam paused for 1 second. Then he walked away, holding his sweet daughter's hand, keeping his broad shoulders proudly squared despite the bitter rejection. That evening, Liam lovingly cooked up pasta because it was a simple Tuesday family tradition. Little Arya perched right on the worn kitchen counter, just like she always did, her toy propped against the flour jar, sharing a quiet emotional bond as they discussed her day, drifting through scattered stories, letting their warm conversation flow naturally. She innocently asked why her doll was named Scout. The protective father had shared this memory before, but she craved the comforting rhythm of truth, so he repeated it softly. Her mother Claire chose it. Claire believed little Arya possessed a special gift, always discovering the quiet magic hidden from the rest of the world, because a scout watches the horizon before anyone else notices, making the beautiful name perfectly fitting. Arya pondered this deep thought with the heavy seriousness she applied to everything important. Then she curiously asked if Scout could actually uncover secrets. Liam gently smiled, explaining it entirely depended on who held him. Stick with me here. Once she slept, he opened his laptop to secretly craft the brilliant risk analysis software he had been building for 2 years. A powerful tool forged in the quiet hours past midnight, built piece by careful piece, built completely alone, without any corporate timelines or wealthy investors breathing down his tired neck. Yet before launching his own project, he paused, his mind drifting back 3 weeks to that fateful day he was first summoned up to Giselle's towering 22nd floor. The server maintenance seemed totally routine. A careless senior technician vanished for 3 minutes, leaving the deeply classified configuration display fully exposed right there on the main terminal screen. The honest mechanic never intended to snoop, but a hidden timestamp buried inside the deep encryption layer snagged his immediate focus. The exact way significant numbers grab a sharp mind without any warning at all. It was an emotional date he could never simply ignore. March 14, 2021, his sweet daughter's birthday. He never would have grasped the massive danger in that complex corporate firewall unless, you see, he had spent 14 months at Columbia University mastering this exact algorithm. A time-stamped encryption setup, highly specific, totally obscure, only detailed in one academic paper from 2019. A paper he actually co-authored. This wasn't some basic corporate software. You couldn't just buy this kind of security program anywhere. It was the type of complex code that stayed buried in research journals, only used by a rare expert who understood the exact theory. He kept his mouth completely shut. He just finished the simple HVAC inspection I originally hired him to do, did his job, signed the service ticket, and quietly left. My corporate empire wasn't his world, and I made that clear. He tried forgetting the whole thing. Then 3 weeks passed. Weston Capital entered the final audit stage before our massive merger. Xavier Monroe handed over the financial files with that slick confidence of a man who knew exactly how to play the corporate game. A junior auditor caught the issue. A 26-year-old named Casey. She had been with my company just 7 months, but she was sharp enough to spot a tiny, fatal flaw in the numbers. A 0.003% gap in quarterly records. One single line that refused to match up with the rest. $400,000. Honestly, pocket change against our $340 million deal. The sort of small number most people just write off. They usually blame computer timing, and nobody asks any questions. But Casey didn't let it slide. She flagged the report and handed it straight to Diana. Diana brought it right to my desk. I immediately told my IT team to pull the logs. My team came back with an update I was completely unprepared to hear. The exact files we needed were locked behind an encryption format they had never seen before. Our expensive enterprise software couldn't even put a dent in it. They needed 48 hours and outside help just to crack it. Stick with me here. I stared at the clock. The signing was 9 a.m. tomorrow. 48 hours was 39 hours too late. Desperate, I called 3 cybersecurity firms. Every single one told me 72 hours minimum. None of them recognized the strange code structure. Xavier strolled into my office at 9 perfectly calm, holding his phone and a fresh glass of water. He had that infuriating arrogance of a man who already controlled exactly how our conversation would end. He swore to me it was just a routine glitch, claimed these minor hiccups popped up during any major financial audit. He promised my IT guys would break the lock with plenty of time to spare. He told me to stop letting a tiny data flaw threaten a massive business deal. He spoke just long enough to sound reassuring, avoiding a single technically false statement. When he finally finished, I quietly thanked him, and he just left. I sat alone in my quiet office, fighting a heavy, sinking feeling I couldn't quite define. He was way too fast to comfort me, the way he just waltzed right in. He already knew my exact fears, and conveniently had the perfect answer ready. I forced the doubt away. Xavier was my late father's trusted anchor for 15 years. You and I both know you don't cut an anchor loose unless you know what's dragging below. By 10:30, things looked much worse. A fourth security firm repeated the exact same brutal timeline. That encryption code? It didn't exist in any corporate database we owned. My team could bypass it, sure, but they needed 3 full days. I stood at my corner office window staring at the skyline. I finally understood. You know that brutal midnight clarity? When everyone's gone and nobody can sugarcoat the truth. I was staring down a tech crisis I absolutely couldn't fix with my current team. If I signed that corporate merger tomorrow morning without clearing the anomaly, I'd be bringing blind, unmeasured risk into a massive acquisition that couldn't survive it. But if I didn't sign, 6 brutal months of negotiations collapsed. My board of directors would finally have the ammunition they'd been stockpiling since my first day as CEO. And Harlan Group would simply choose a competitor. Someone without massive, unexplained black holes tearing through their transaction records. Diana knocked and barged right into my office. She had that quiet boldness earned over 2 years of late nights together. She sat across from me in total silence. Then she quietly admitted she'd been trying to remember something. And then it hit her, the quiet mechanic. Our boardroom 3 weeks ago. His warning about the transaction logs. The exact words he said before my stubborn pride flared up and I banished him. Diana had been hiding in the corner that day, scribbling on her notepad. She wrote down his warning verbatim. She recorded every detail, never trying to filter out what didn't seem important yet. Because she always did. You and I both know relevance is something we usually only recognize too late. She opened her notes, found the exact entry, and read his warning aloud. The cooling loop on the backup server unit has a critical pressure leak. If we ignore this today, you're going to suffer major data disruptions in your transaction history during peak trading hours. She repeated it twice. I let the harsh truth wash over me. I finally spoke. Find me his personnel file. The human resources document told me absolutely nothing useful. Name, home address, maintenance department, 14 months of flawless service, 0 warnings. Diana leaned over my shoulder, pulled up a browser, and searched his full name online without me even asking her. The top result? A 2020 academic paper from a highly respected computational finance journal. The exact kind of heavy research publication that only 3 groups ever bother reading. Stressed graduate students, their demanding professors, and a tiny sliver of elite finance professionals who actually care about the math behind their algorithms. The title of the paper. It featured a specific tech phrase I instantly recognized from the crisis report my IT department sent 3 hours ago. I quickly scanned the abstract. The second author credited was Liam R. Ashford, Columbia University. I read his name again much slower. My heart, which I'd spent 2 long years training to stay totally numb during corporate crises, started racing out of control. I checked the time. 10:47 p.m. The corporate signing was exactly 10 hours and 13 minutes away. I stared at the residential address in his file, then I looked at Diana. Diana stayed completely silent, which was its own unspoken command. I grabbed my car keys straight out of the desk drawer and threw on my coat, marching to the elevator without even changing out of my heels. I didn't grab a bag, just that folded piece of paper with his address and a desperation I had been far too proud to admit feeling 48 hours earlier. I drove myself tonight. I hadn't been behind the wheel alone in 2 years, and the sheer familiarity of it. Hands gripped on the wheel, the city blurring past the windows without waiting for my permission. It felt grounding, right until the crushing reality of where I was going fully settled back in. Liam's apartment building was a narrow, 4-story walk-up deep in Brooklyn, far from the trendy neighborhoods that demanded a massive waiting list. I climbed 3 brutal flights of stairs in designer heels that were definitely not made for walking. I stood outside apartment 314 and I knocked. My corporate armor was completely gone. I wasn't wearing any carefully constructed CEO expression tonight. I was just a broken woman who had burned through every single option, painfully aware of my own utter desperation. When the heavy door opened, Liam stared at me with that exact same quiet stillness he had brought into my conference room. Watchful, completely unhurried, and totally unintimidated by my wealth or position. Or the terrible fact that I coldly dismissed him in front of 8 board members exactly 3 weeks ago. He wore a faded gray shirt, and I noticed a worn notebook resting on the table behind him. His apartment smelled like clean soap and a warm feeling that was simply the gentle atmosphere of a home where a young child lived. He glanced at me, then peered past my shoulder into the dim hallway to confirm I was alone. I was alone. He looked back, waiting silently. I whispered his name. My voice cracked slightly as I spoke. Nothing overly dramatic. Not a vulnerability I would have ever chosen to reveal if I had any real choice left. Just a tiny crack in my polished surface, the kind that happens when you hold on to everything for too long. I need your help, I pleaded. He didn't offer any comforting reassurance. He didn't instinctively step back to hold his door open. He just watched me and asked, "What kind?" So I confessed everything. I kept the explanation brief, figuring I owed him the basic human respect of not wasting any more of his time. The locked transaction logs, the massive corporate merger signing in under 11 hours, the 4 security firms failing to break the system, and that old academic paper bearing his name. The exact encryption method I prayed he might recognize. I nervously watched him process it. He stayed quiet so long that I started drafting the gracious response I would say when he turned me down, the one that would be measured and composed, hiding just how much my entire life was riding on the next 30 seconds. Finally, he murmured, "You know, I really considered saying no." I nodded. I knew. He asked, "Then why aren't I?" I looked him dead in the eye and spoke the only honest truth I had left. "Because your little girl is asleep in that apartment. And I don't think you want her growing up believing that doing the right thing suddenly stops mattering the moment it becomes inconvenient." He slowly pushed the door completely open. He told me to come inside and keep quiet because his daughter was still fast asleep. His apartment was absolutely everything that cold personnel file had missed. I noticed the notebook on his desk, complex math equations filling the pages margin to margin. The crowded bookshelves lining the wall were organized by some quiet logic I couldn't understand. The tiny little pair of pink sneakers lined up perfectly next to his heavy work boots near the door. Scout sat on the corner of the coffee table, tilted slightly, his little frayed ear facing completely outward. I stared softly at that rabbit for a long moment before I finally looked away. I dumped the server log files from my laptop to a drive and handed it over without a word. He sat at his worn workbench and opened the data. Then he went completely quiet, the kind of silence that falls when a man does what he's born for. No performance, no posturing, just working from a deep part of himself he never had to manage. I sank into the spare chair and just watched him. He recognized the network architecture in under 2 minutes. I saw it in the absolute focus of his attention, in a subtle shift of his posture, in the specific stillness of a man whose quiet intuition was just backed by hard evidence. He didn't announce it. He just kept reading. Minutes later, he muttered, eyes glued to the screen, timestamp seeded encryption. The master key is a specific date used as a seed. Whoever coded this used an academic framework detailed in a paper published in 2019. He paused. "I know the paper." Another heavy pause. "I co-authored it." I stayed silent. He finally met my eyes, the The seed date is exactly what I need to break it. 3 weeks ago, inside your server room, I spotted a config file on the terminal right before your technician returned. The timestamp sitting in that file was March 14th, 2021. He let the heavy silence hang there for a moment. You told me to leave before I could even finish. I wanted to offer a sincere apology, but the right words felt like they hadn't even been invented yet. Or maybe I just couldn't find them at 11:30 p.m., 10 hours before the biggest corporate crisis of my life. I stared down at the shaking hands in my lap. I pictured that cold, sterile conference room, and the board of directors, and those 30 seconds I spent deciding this brilliant man wasn't worth my time. He could have easily submitted an anonymous tip. He could have called the Federal Regulatory Authority. You and I both know he could have done nothing, letting my broken system burn until it became someone else's emergency. But he did absolutely none of those things. He went home to his little girl, keeping the data breach quiet because it wasn't his corporate empire, wasn't his problem. Yet here he was, hunched at his desk at midnight, decrypting my private files just because I showed up at his front door with nothing to offer except the raw truth about how absolutely desperate my situation was. He rebuilt that decryption algorithm entirely from memory, coding it fast and clean in a programming language that flowed effortlessly under his hands, and the server began processing. The small room stayed silent while it ran. Somewhere in that silence, I blurted out without really meaning to, "Why did you leave finance?" He never lifted his eyes from the monitor. "Something much more important came up," he muttered. I swallowed the obvious follow-up question. After a minute, I asked about his rabbit's name instead. He told me the whole story, Claire, the naming process, what a good scout was meant to do. I stayed completely quiet after that. The dusty wall clock read 1:17 a.m. when the terminal display finally populated. The encrypted files unlocked in sequence, one by one, until the massive transaction history flooded his screen. 3 years of it, every single entry, every timestamp, every hidden account routing code. Liam scanned through the first 20 lines without breathing a word. Then he slowly set down his little notepad and whispered, "You need to call your attorney right now." I leaned toward the screen and saw it. You know that crushing clarity that hits when you can't outrun the truth anymore? That devastating understanding finally broke me. Exactly what I was looking at. The missing money that had been. Hiding inside that financial anomaly wasn't $400,000. It was $47 million moved across 31 months through a clever sequence of corporate transfers, kept small enough to vanish against the sheer volume of our daily business. Each one slipped below the automatic flagging threshold, each perfectly timed with our busiest corporate quarters, when my oversight was completely stretched thin. All of it quietly routed into a shell company buried down in the Cayman Islands. Every single fraudulent transaction authorized by the exact same digital signature, Xavier Monroe. I sat with the staggering number, and I sat with the name. I sat there feeling that sharp, cold clarity that only truly comes from realizing the shiny corporate life I built was completely fake this whole time. 3 years. Every board meeting, every executive strategy call. Every single morning my partner walked into my office with smooth answers to my hardest questions. I didn't cry, my foolish CEO pride wouldn't let me, and I was past tears anyway. I stared blankly at the wall, thinking about the brutal reality the next few hours demanded, and quietly braced my heart. We finally caught him in the lobby of Western Capital, right at 5:42 in the morning, just as he strolled through the doors, holding his coffee, his expensive leather portfolio, and that sickeningly familiar composure. The arrogant ease of a man who thinks he owns my entire world. I stood there waiting, alongside my lead corporate attorney and 2 federal agents who had rushed over from the field office after I made that devastating call at 2:15 a.m., sending the complete digital evidence package right alongside it. Xavier noticed us right before he hit the elevator bank. He froze completely. He locked eyes with me, wearing an expression I had never seen on his face before. Not panic, not guilt. Just a rapid recalculation behind eyes that spent 43 years mastering the CEO art of staying completely unreadable in difficult rooms. He tried his first move, which was a perfectly calm and calculated denial. He listed accounting methodologies. He brought up interpretive frameworks. He claimed there were simple explanations our IT department missed because they didn't fully grasp his complex financial system. My attorney simply dropped the printed transaction log right on the lobby table between us. 31 months, $47 million. 31 transfer authorizations, each bearing his personal digital signature, each quietly routed to that same offshore account. No corporate framework could explain that away. Xavier stared at me one last time before the federal agents finally moved. "I was keeping this entire company alive," he muttered. "You just don't have enough ruthless experience to understand what that actually required." I didn't even respond. I nodded once and watched Xavier Monroe get escorted through the glass lobby doors into the pale early morning, and the hollow space he left behind felt incredibly quiet. My attorney was already on his phone, smoothly pivoting into the next legal sequence. Diana quietly appeared from a nearby side corridor. She always had this comforting way of appearing whenever my perfect world cracked, standing beside me without saying a single word. Through the glass doors, the street outside was finally beginning to lighten. Wearing that specific gray-blue the city always gets in the 30 minutes before actual dawn, I stood there, suddenly craving the simple honesty of the mechanic I had foolishly pushed away. I had just set down a weight I never even knew I was carrying. For the first time in 2 years, I truly understood just how dangerously fragile the ground beneath my feet had actually been. The man I trusted above everyone had been quietly destroying the exact foundation I thought I stood upon. And the quiet mechanic I arrogantly dismissed in 30 seconds flat had spotted the very first crack in that wall 3 weeks before it finally shattered. At 9 that morning, instead of a celebratory signing ceremony, I called an emergency board session. I walked in completely alone, without Xavier beside me for the first time in 2 years, and laid out the entire devastating truth. The system variants, the hidden logs, the architecture, the $47 million. Xavier Monroe, and the federal investigation that was already in motion. And then, simply because. Somewhere between 2 a.m. and 5:42, I finally decided that I was absolutely done building my company on ground I hadn't personally inspected. I told them about the maintenance mechanic, his warning 3 weeks earlier, and my own blinding pride when I should have just listened. I stated my failures plainly, and I refused to soften the blow. I confessed it in front of 12 board members and both Harland Group executives who arrived expecting a massive corporate celebration, only to find themselves in something else entirely. The massive boardroom fell dead silent. Their lead representative actually praised my absolute transparency, and miraculously the merger survived. The signing would just move back 1 month to allow a complete external forensic financial audit of our entire transaction history. It was an absolute miracle for a corporate crisis that seemed entirely hopeless just an hour prior. Once the exhausting session ended and the boardroom began emptying, one senior board member stopped me in the corridor. The exact same guy who had scoffed at me 3 weeks ago. He wanted to know exactly who that brilliant technician was. I tracked him down that afternoon near the north entrance doors, quietly working on an electrical panel in the access corridor, his heavy toolbox open at his boots, giving his complete quiet attention to the job in front of him. Little Arya sat beside him on the tile, backpack unzipped, scribbling away in a small notebook. Probably some homework. Or maybe sketching one of those elaborate, imaginative drawings she always narrated to him. Scout rested in her lap. I swallowed my pride, crossed the lobby, and approached them. There was no corporate audience here. No attorneys, no board members, absolutely nobody keeping score. Just the empty lobby, the warm corridor light, and the three of us. I crouched right down to Arya's eye level, looked at the sweet girl holding her stuffed rabbit, and said, "I owe you a massive apology. The last time I saw your father, I wasn't kind to him at all, and I was completely wrong." Arya considered my words for a moment, giving me that fierce, serious attention children reserve for important things. Then she gently lifted Scout from her lap and held the rabbit out with both hands. A pure offering, far more deliberate and genuine than any corporate deal I had ever negotiated. "You can hold Scout if you want to," little Arya whispered. "He always helps when someone is feeling sad." I took the worn rabbit carefully. I held it close to my chest, and that tight knot locked behind my sternum since 2 in the morning finally broke wide open. And I finally just let go. When I finally stood, I looked directly at Liam. He had watched the entire exchange without speaking. I simply said, "I would like to offer you the director of algorithmic risk position. Name your own terms." He studied her for a long moment, then just shook his head. No fake regret, no arrogant smirk, just a quiet, humble refusal. "Thank you," he said gently. "But no," she froze. "I'm building something of my own," he told her. "Think I'm nearly done." The powerful CEO finally got it. Yesterday, she'd have called it pride, but right now she saw this wasn't some cheap negotiating tactic. He was just a grounded man who knew exactly what he was doing, working quietly for 2 whole years, never needing high society validation to keep going. Giselle handed the rabbit back to Arya. The little girl took the bunny with both hands, settling it into her lap. She handled it with the tender care of a mechanic fixing something precious. Giselle swallowed her pride. If you ever need a first client for your project, please call me before you call anyone. Liam just looked at her. A soft shift crossed his face, not quite a full smile but the steady foundation of one. I will think about it, he said. Let us step away from the corporate drama. That evening, Liam cooked pasta. Wednesday pasta never cared about broken pride or CEO breakdowns. Arya perched on the counter, chattering about the sad, rich lady from the glass towers, the woman who held her rabbit for a moment and cried quietly into its fur, and how she seemed to finally breathe afterward. Liam stirred the simmering sauce. Yes, he murmured, sensing the deep heartbreak involved. Arya swung her legs against the cabinets, asking if her bunny found anything hidden today, the way that rabbit always managed to dig up hidden things. Liam turned away from the stove, looking down at his daughter's wide, honest eyes. He took in her serious little face, the rabbit resting in her arm, and softly said yes. Scout had definitely uncovered something hidden today, something buried deep for a very long time. Arya seemed fully satisfied with this. She watched him finish up dinner, announcing that she was starving. Then she asked to watch that documentary about deep ocean fish after they ate, the creatures living in the absolute darkest depths, making their very own light because they learned never to wait for salvation from above. He smiled and agreed. He agreed with the exact same steady devotion he showed every morning, promising to pick her up from school, simply, completely, and without fail. Once she was asleep, he sat at his desk. He opened the laptop to his platform, the exact way it had waited for him every night for 2 years. The complex software model he coded in the quiet hours after Arya slept, just piece by careful piece. You and I know this kind of quiet grind, a foundation built without wealthy boards or deadlines, answering only to the man who knew his true worth. The logo glowing in the top corner was humble and clean, Ashford Analytics. He worked silently for hours. Then he saved his file. Closing the laptop, he sat in the apartment's silence. But tonight that silence felt completely different than it had just 24 hours ago. Not exactly better and not lighter. Just different. The feeling you get when a heavy emotional barrier finally shifts into a totally new position. You realize you carried that pride so long, you forgot what your bare hands felt like, empty. The very next morning, before the CEO even finished her first black coffee, an email pinged from a completely unknown address outside her elite network. No subject line, just a single sentence waiting, ready to change everything for them. Scout is safely back with his rightful owner. Have a good morning. Giselle read the words, then read them again. Her coffee cup hit the mahogany desk. Beyond her glass walls, the corporate machine was already racing. It always did by 8 o'clock. Fast, loud, and totally indifferent to the breaking hearts of the people trapped inside it. But the powerful CEO simply sat at her desk in the perfect quiet of her office, smiling before the grind began. A soft, vulnerable smile she hadn't managed in a very long time. But you and I know the quiet mechanic never needed validation. He knew his own worth the day he walked out of that corporate boardroom. Holding his daughter's hand, his shoulders squared with quiet dignity, he held on to that steady truth during those 3 weeks. He kept completely silent about the heartbreak he saw, simply because it wasn't his story to tell. He proved it past midnight, stepping out of his world to open her digital files. He did the hard work because her life was falling apart, and he could fix it. Some dirty secrets get buried deep inside 31 months of carefully timed bank transfers hidden in a corporate maze only one document ever fully exposed. They foolishly assumed the humble man in the blue uniform was just there, just to turn a wrench on command, with absolutely nothing else to offer her world. But as Scout gently taught Arya, and Arya unknowingly grounded Liam, and as he unintentionally showed Giselle how to actually trust someone, without ever realizing he was saving her, you and I know the things most worth finding are never hidden forever. They are just waiting for a real connection, looking at the exact right moment, in the right direction, refusing to walk away before the story is fully written.